All right. Good afternoon and welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this fantastic program with the author of Better Great Than Never and UVA rower alum Lindsay Shoop. Alongside Lindsay is longtime coach of UVA women's rowing, Kevin Sauer. After after they have their discussion, we will have time to answer a bit of Q&A that you have for Lindsay and for Coach Sauer. Again, thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the program. And now I would like to introduce our speakers today. Coach Kevin Sauer came to UVA in 1988. Since his arrival, he is a two-time Collegiate Rowing Coaches Association National Coach of the Year. And since he's been here, he has elevated UVA to be one of the elite level rowing programs around the country and has guided the Cavaliers to a pair of NCAA championships in 2010 and 2012. He has coached tremendous rowers who have gone on to win many awards and even an Olympic gold medal. Now, Lindsay Dare Shoop. After graduating from UVA in 2003, Lindsay Shoop became a coach, author, speaker, and a lifelong athlete. She is an Olympic gold medalist, a three-time world champion, five-time World Cup medalist, and a National Rowing Hall of Fame inductee. She currently seeks to mentor, inspire, and improve the lives of others by sharing her knowledge of health and wellness, along with her journey of self-discovery, ultimate defeat to Olympic gold. Thank you both for being here. And I will turn the show over to you, Coach Sauer, to sort of talk about the UVA rowing team and relates to Lindsay.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. It's an honor to be on with Lindsay for sure. And I'm happy to be here to add to whatever I can add to this. Yeah, just talking about UVA rowing in general, just started back for the men's club team back in 1966 when the Ravenna Reservoir was formed. Women started rowing here in 1974, also as club. And we had some pretty good success, through the years, but I came in 88 and we were able to, I was in charge of the whole program. And by 94, 95, there was some talk about adding women as a varsity sport here at UVA. When we first got here, there was a one-bay boathouse with a dirt floor and a porta-john in the woods and no electricity and no water. So it was a frontier crew, we used to call it. But as we got more support through the years from athletics and that type of thing, we were able to expand our abilities to compete even at a higher level. So the men are still club here, the women are varsity, and we work in concert really, really well, I think. But over the years, we've been able to increase our equipment. We've been able to recruit student athletes out of high schools and all over the world, but also kids that have never rowed before, such as Lindsay. So we have a combination of athletes that have never done the sport, but also athletes that have done it at a very high level that we recruit to come in. And over the past, this is our 26th year. We just celebrated our 25th years of varsity sport this past year. So this is our 26th year as a varsity sport. And we've won 2 national championships, 19 ACC championships, and also 2 team championships at the NCAAs and 9 individual boat championships. So I think the important thing about this is that the NCAA championship is made up of 3 different boats, a first 8, a second 8, and a 4. And together, those boats create the points that'll get you to be a team champion. So not one boat by itself, all 3 boats together, and their results and the depth that you have in your program will allow you to get to that level. So we've been fortunate enough to finish second 3 times and win twice and multiple thirds and multiple fourths, that type of thing. But it's the power of the team that really is a big factor in this. One of the things that I always say is that this sport of rowing is like Outward Bound. And if you don't know what Outward Bound is, it's an outdoor program that basically teaches you that you can achieve more than you think you can. And they do that by the power of team, by the power of the group. And they say to a group of people, you're going to climb that mountain and we're not going to give you any water and no food, and you're going to get up there on your own. And people go like, no, that's not happening, right? But they do it together and they figure it out and they get to the top of that mountain. And it's very similar in rowing where you're in a boat and you think you're done, but you don't want to let the person in front of you but down or the person behind you down. And so you keep pushing, and they're thinking about it the same way you are, about the same time, like they're done. I can't push anymore. I can't do this anymore. But the power of the group allows everybody to do more than they can as an individual. So that's the essence of this sport. And we tried to, here at UVA, parlay that into our culture as well, where it's about everybody's part of this, from the person that's all the way at the bottom of the team to all the way at the top of the team. From the top, you pull up, and from the bottom, you push. And so that's kind of how we have looked at it over the years. And it's a really important part of growth for these young women, that they come in and are able to latch onto that of substance and do some amazing things. So that's the intro I have anyway.
Well,
So Lindsay, how does this, how does UVA rowing sort of lead you and to pursue the Olympics, and how did that affect you?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when I think about the things that Kevin was just saying, getting to write this book, the way that I've coached over the last 10 years is just the way that I've coached. It's like I kind of take for granted almost that isn't this how it's supposed to be? Aren't these the things that everyone does? And a friend of mine recently said, you don't realize what you know. Like, not everybody knows the things that each of us as individuals know, and I thought the longer that I coached, I realized that there were these underlying characteristics that really were directly connected to what I learned and what was demonstrated by the people around me and by Kevin, and what I was taught over the years that I then honed as an athlete, that I carried from my time at UVA to my time through the national team, which I then was able to then even further for the next generation, the athletes that I was getting to coach. And to give an example, I'm going to read a little bit about my first day of rowing practice. That is this demonstration of how the team really works, because if it weren't as inviting of a culture, as team-oriented of a culture, I probably would have walked away. I tried to run away, which I'll read a little bit about. But if it hadn't been for the fact that there were so many different types of people on the team at all these different levels, it would have been even more intimidating for me to try and walk into this program, on day one. And because of the nature of everyone that was there, I felt very welcomed on my first day. I felt like, oh my gosh, I finally found my place here, because I was this awkward, lanky girl, who was kind of athletic and grew up with a bunch of boys. And so then to meet other people that had similar characteristics to me made me feel comfortable. But then also to have people that had similarities but stark contrasts, and yet we all came together in this incredibly unique sport that is rowing. I talk about in the book about, I played almost a dozen different sports growing up, but rowing was the one that put the control in my hands. Like, my own development was, there are elements of it that I can get better at through my own, efforts, but also the things that I would get better at with my teammates, and so it really was the one that created just a different type of cohesion and a different type of work ethic compared to everything else. So, if you don't mind, I want to read a little bit, since we are talking about a book here. I do want to read a very short piece about my first day of practice. And so this is, and Kevin will talk about how this even came to be too. But to set up how I entered the team, this is the spring semester, January of my junior year at UVA. I had spent 2.5 years doing all the things that college students do, right? Whatever you did in college, yeah, we were all there at some point or another, potentially we'll be there. So I spent 2.5 years wandering. I was gaining weight and my grades were declining, and I wasn't, as social as I was. And I certainly was not as physically active as I had once been, hence the weight gain. There's some funny stories in the book about exactly how unfit I was when Kevin and I met. But so this is from the first portion of the book. On a snowy Wednesday in January, at the start of the spring semester of my junior year at UVA, I drove my 18-year-old Volvo across campus for my first day of rowing practice. I pulled up to the giant metal and brick block of a building known as the Cage and found a parking spot close to the building's tiny glass entrance. When I got there, I was surprised to find that cars were in the lot, but no people were milling around, not a soul in sight. Despite the strange sense that being alone gave me, I headed inside to go find the team. Back before the fall semester ended, Kevin had gone out of his way to show me around the team's indoor facilities. So on my first official day of practice, I was mildly familiar with the cage. All I needed to do was to remember which way Kevin and I had walked on the day he had shown me around. When I walked into the cage, being inside jogged my memory. I recalled passing through 2 sets of wooden doors, and if my memory served, I had hung a right after passing through both. I also recalled that if I ended up walking down a long hallway, it meant I had gone too far. So I headed back, cautiously, in exactly the way I remembered. I passed a few sets of stairs that ascended in various directions, then came upon the first set of wooden doors. My first sign that I was heading the right way. When I reached that first set of doors, my nerves unexpectedly welled. It was as if the doors themselves stood before me to beg the question. Are you certain of this step you are about to take? I stopped and took a breath. As I exhaled it, I discovered a smidge of additional courage, then pushed my way through. I was one decision and one step closer to the team. Now for door number 2. I exhaled as I continued on my way. Several steps later, I hesitated again, not because of a physical barrier this time, but rather the unfamiliar sounds that filled my ears. With every step I had taken since I entered the cage, the sounds of innumerable voices had been accumulating, and with them, my thoughts. As a result, my mind was brimming with uncertainty. I was already unsure of taking this step, but now this? Just how many girls are on this team? I wondered. What seemed like 100 individual voices intensified with every step I took until I finally came to the second set of wooden doors. I had correctly remembered the way, taken every step, and made it to that second set of doors, the final decision that stood between me and officially showing up for my first day of rowing practice. Before being all in and boldly entering, I gave myself one last chance to change my mind. I quietly stepped up to the doors without touching them, then peered through one of the small vertical windows, and without detection, I snuck a peek of what awaited me on the other side. Up until the moment I walked into the cage that day, I had the impression that Kevin would teach me everything I needed to know, that he would take me under his wing because I was somehow unique. However, when I peeked through that small vertical window, I saw at least 50 athletic young women, all well tanned from their recent team training trip to Florida. Yay, Florida. Every one of them tall, many of them taller than me. They stood gathered in clusters, chatting as they awaited their coaches. They were all wearing athletic clothes, proper rowing gear that was far better than the multicolored metallic bronze short tights my mom had given me. One look was all I needed to instantly assess them as confident and knowledgeable. I assumed they would be better than me, stronger than me, faster than me, more capable than me, given their experience relative to mine. I imagined they had unattainable strength, speed, and talent like my childhood heroes. My apprehension deemed them a room full of real athletes. I reverted. I no longer felt 20. I may as well have been right back in the 8th grade at my varsity basketball tryout. Back to retreating behind the bleachers. Back to limiting myself. Back to questioning what I felt prepared for. Back to hiding from sight to avoid embarrassment. When I compared myself to what I saw through the tiny window, I panicked. How could I possibly be good enough? I've never done this before. What was I thinking? Everything about the scene intimidated me. So rather than flinging the doors open, finding the coaches, and introducing myself, I chose to head for safety. I quietly backed away from the doors, then turned in the direction of the parking lot where I knew my car would be waiting. Almost there. Had it not been for 2 tall rower girls who pushed through the double doors right as I was about to flee, I would have escaped. A moment earlier, and we would have smashed into one another. A moment later, and they would have never known I was there at all. My rowing career would have been over before it even had the chance to start.
Their timing could not have been more serendipitous. Upon making eye contact, my escape was officially thwarted. My decision was made. I had no choice but to try out for the team. When the two girls asked if I was there for practice, I said yes, to avoid embarrassment, and followed them into the gym. Once inside, a nervous chill filled my veins. The whiteness and flickering buzz of the gym lights reminded me of my basketball days and pierced my wide open eyes. Not a muscle in my body was relaxed. Every part of me was on full alert. I can only imagine how pale my face must have fallen. Because I did not know anyone, I stood an awkward few feet from the group, feeling lost. A few uncomfortable moments later, one of the girls on the team must have sensed how I felt, so she came over and introduced herself. After her, several other girls wearing semi-sunburned grins followed suit. One by one, they welcomed me. Their collective gesture warmed my nervous chill. Eventually, after meeting at least 25 new faces, I no longer doubted my presence there at that practice. By the time I met half of the girls on the team, I knew I had made the right decision. I had found my place, my purpose, my reason. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I was in exactly the right place at exactly the right time with my team. And I think back and I reflect on that moment a lot, because I feel like we all have these moments where everybody has their first day. We all have our first moment. We all have these nervous moments. And now looking back and thinking about this, it really is about all of these small moments that accumulate, and how UVA showed me, like, the sport itself was this opportunity for not only me to accumulate these small actions that built up, to the Olympics, right? This thing that is seemingly the great thing, when in reality, all of those tiny little moments along the way are the great thing. It just ends up in this thing that is a piece of something even greater. But it's also a testament to the importance of our small acts of kindness and the interactions that we have with one another, because all of these tiny little imperceptible things, these things that often go overlooked, are those things, and that every opportunity around us, we can positively influence our own lives, but also the lives of those around us. Kevin, I'm going to throw this over to you now, because this is exactly the very first time that I spoke in front of a group of people. I brought this up because it was all about Kevin being this type of person that sees small opportunities and small moments and shares kindness with total strangers. And had it not been for that exact thing, we might not be having this conversation right now. Some other odd serendipitous series of events would have had to have occurred, along the way. You remember the day we met, Kevin? Of course.
Of course.
Or even before that, I guess.
Yeah. So the serendipitous moments, there were several of them, but the initial one was when we first got to Virginia. We needed a dentist, right? So we searched out a dental practice, and the one that we settled on was fairly local, fairly nearby, and that type of thing. Seemed like a good dentist and a good hygienist, and the hygienist just happened to be Lindsay's mother. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, but all of us have been in a dental's, getting our teeth cleaned by a hygienist at some point in our lives, and it's usually a one-way conversation because we have all this stuff in our mouth, right? And so they ask questions, but I know that they don't really expect an answer, and because we can't answer. But so when I met her mom, Lindsay's mom, Valley, the first time, she's a talker as well. The nut does not fall far from the tree for Lindsay. And so she, just filled me in on her life. We happen to have the same birthday, exact same birthday. We're exactly the same age. That first day, I learned that, and we asked about our children and all that kind of stuff. And so she had 2 children. I had 2 children. She talked about that. When she gave me a break, I could talk about my children and my wife. Anyway, so after a few years, she's, talked more and more about this daughter of hers that was starting to sprout and become really tall. And I said, I basically stopped her and said, "How tall?" And she said, "Well, she's pushing 6 feet now." And she was like 14 or something, right at that time, 15. And I'm going like, really? So, so then I started hanging out a couple of times. Like my son-in-law was actually her assistant basketball coach. He wasn't my son-in-law then, but so there's a connection there. And so we started talking about what she was doing. And so I went to a volleyball game, I think, and I went to a basketball game or two just to watch. I'm going like, okay, this kid's a good athlete. So at some point I mentioned to Valley, her mom, I said, well, she ought to try rowing. If she goes to UVA, she ought to try rowing. And Valley goes, okay, whatever. I don't know if she mentioned it to her or not, but anyway, so at some point before her freshman year, once she got into UVA, I suggested to Lindsay that she try rowing. And she like, no, I don't want to do that. And then a year later, I saw her somewhere and suggested again, nah. Then a year later, before her junior year, no. But then finally, and Lindsay talks about this in the book very well, a lot better than I can tell you. We ran into each other at a swim meet at the Aquatic and Fitness Center. And I basically said, Lindsay, it's about time. Yeah. And she had a pretty cool, not a cool experience, but an experience the night before. It was serendipitous that she goes, okay. Yeah. And so maybe you should talk about that. That I think is really good.
I was actually going to, it was just, the timing was right, and here's another one of these small moments where, again, getting to write this book made me realize just how many connections there were, that sometimes the universe kind of pushes you to where you need to go in life, and it's up to you to take up the mantle and, assume that opportunity. But the timing was just right. The night before we met, and I'll read the exact words because this is from a journal entry. There are journal entries throughout the book that are real journal entries that I've, written for years, that I started doing years ago because a friend of mine did it. And I thought, oh, adults do this. Okay. And so I was somewhere in my freshman or sophomore, maybe junior year, maybe sophomore year, when I really started journaling. But by junior year, the night before Kevin and I bumped into each other, I had woken up in the middle of the night, and I tell the whole story in the book, but I'd woken up in the middle of the night and wrote down everything that was keeping me awake that night. I was having trouble falling asleep. And I literally wrote, I'll just read a piece of the journal, the entry. So November 30th of 2001, which was the night before we bumped into each other. You got to reflect, exercise, and reflect. That is all I can say. Being so exhausted that you can barely move. That is the best feeling in the world. That and sleep and loving people. I don't have too much to write, at least not that I wish to start with right now. I am too sheepy for all that right now. I don't know. I just don't know. Who will I be? School is almost over for the semester. And now that I am where I am, I wish a thing or two were different. I wish I had done crew. I wish I were not a lazy bum. Then I may have actually been something. The world will never know. And that includes me. And lo and behold, the very next day, clearly I remembered that Kevin had planted that seed of rowing years before. And I write in the book about how I just kind of assumed that I wouldn't be able to be good at it. And it just, the timing was absolutely right that we just happened to bump into one another again, and to even reflect on that and think about that, to think about how and why I live my life the way that I do every single day, with hope and positivity in my heart, with possibility as well, is directly linked. And I trace it all back to that night when I woke up in the middle of the night and thought that it was too late for me to be anything. And at the time I was 20 years old. I was only a few months past 20. And I realized that, and I've come to this point a few times in my life where it's like, it is never too late to become better at who you are or right the ship, so to speak. And here was this opportunity when Kevin came along. And so everything about what I learned from Kevin in Virginia is a huge piece of who I am every single day, and Kevin, that's why I send you a thank you card every year. Because for me, it really is this significant moment, and it again goes back to those small moments where we never know just what sort of butterfly effect can be set into place,
And I know that both of you all have, especially in the book, you being an Olympic gold medalist is is a pretty big part of who you are. And I know both of y'all have experience. So take us through sort of what goes into training for the Olympics, what goes into kind of wanting to be in that space.
Let me interject something right here that I think is really important, and it's in the book. She talks about it, and I didn't realize that I had acted this way after this incident. But after, she was a two-time first team All-American. So before she was she started in January of her junior year, by a year later, she was in the varsity 8, kicking butt, doing that, and became a first team All-American that year. And then the following year, talked her into going to grad school and did it again. And after her senior year, or during her last year, her 5th year, I talked to the national team coach, Tom Terhar, who was very prominent in the book, and said, you might want to look at this kid. She's pretty raw, but you may want to take a look. You may want to invite her to Princeton next summer, next fall. And he said, oh, I'll think about it, whatever. It ended up happening. But then we were up for a race in the fall up at Princeton. And so I thought, I'm going to ask Tom if I can go watch practice. So I watched a practice while we were up there. And I'm looking around, wondering where Lindsay is. And I asked him, I said, where's Lindsay? He goes, oh, she's in a single. So basically he was kind of focusing on this one group, and then Lindsay was in a single, right? And anyway, so I asked him, so how's she doing? And he goes, I don't know if she's got what it takes, and I felt so bad for her, and I'm going I think she does. Just, I'm thinking to myself, just stick with her. I'm thinking to myself, because I'm not going to say that to him directly, but I hinted at it a little bit. But anyway, and ironically, 6 months later, she was one of the top rowers at the National Training Center from that day, 6 months. Yeah. And so it ended up, and she talks about that a lot in the book, but it was just really a cool, not at the time, but how it all happened, that she just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it and continued to keep at it through her career. But that moment was kind of a watershed moment for me as a coach, to see someone that I had coached that I really thought had what it took, takes to do it. And then hear that I don't know if she's going to do it. And I thought, I think she does, I think she has what it takes. Just stick with her, And then I was kind of in the book, she talks about after that practice, she came up to me, and I was kind of not put off, but didn't want to talk to her very much, because I'd heard that from her coach. I didn't know how to communicate that. I'd forgotten that until it was in the book, and I'm going oh yeah, I did, was kind of not nice, not kind, because I didn't know what to say to her. I didn't know how. I had something that I knew that I didn't want her to know, so it was really hard for me to communicate with her at that time. So, but she took that and went forward from there, and she can talk a lot about that. But that was a really, really impactful moment for me as a coach, a previous coach, to see your protege, so to speak, that is okay, she's struggling right now, but I still think she's got what it takes, So, yeah.
And that right there, yeah. To think about it being 6 months, I'm right, it was 6 months. We all have those times where anything challenging is going to be hard. And that was one of the biggest things that Tom used to always say, the national team coach, who is still the women's national team coach, not just from the day-to-day practice standpoint. Every time we would enter a race or an air test or something like that, not every time, but many times, he would say, this is going to be hard. Right? Let's put the cards on the table. Let's be clear. This will be the hardest thing you have ever done. And for however hard that is, it's going to be even harder than that. And there were these little nuggets that just got placed throughout my career that, it wasn't until I wrote the book that I realized when they were placed, because I went back and looked at all of my training logs and everything to see, but they're definitely pieces that are folded into who I am. I was just talking with someone recently at US Rowing about this, where no matter how hard or how long you think something is going to take, it's going to be harder and it's going to take longer, and that's also something that, to go back to Molly, who is a character in the book, who was a fellow UVA teammate who taught me an immense amount, who I
got to travel, who was in Jersey training with me when I first got there, you know, was a huge impact on that. Was able to bring a second element of UVA, not just inside myself, but someone who I had trained with at Virginia to the national team. You know, she made a comment to me very early on in my career, was she said, Shoopy, I can only count on something when I'm in the process of doing it. And it's funny because I've spoken to her about this since, and she was like, that sounds like something I would say, you know, not that she really remembered it completely, but it played out over and over and over again, where for as much as, you know, you think okay, here I am, this is going to happen. Well, don't ever take that for granted is what I really turned that into. So for as much as you might not be in that place where I was in the single that day by myself, figuring things out, you know, when Tom told you that he wasn't sure if it was going to work out for me, until you're in the process of doing it, that meant that it was an opportunity to step forward, you know, for as much as it is that I'm not certain that I'm going to be in this seat, in this boat on this day, it's also not certain that I won't be in that seat, in that boat on that day, you know, and really waking up every day and seeing it like that, it allowed me to shrug off those tough days, because there were many times when you get knocked down, and sometimes it could feel like all it took was one bad day to wipe away 10 great ones, you know. And that's where having all the training logs and all the memory that I do and writing all these things down really helped, because I could look back and go, oh, right, the last week and a half has been pretty great. Like it hasn't all been terrible, you know. And I might, you know, there were days, shoot, I tell people that I learned how to row 4 days before our Olympic final. You know, there was like this epiphany, this thing that Tom told us 4 days before our Olympic final that changed dramatically some of the things that we were doing in the boat from a rhythm standpoint. But every single day, no matter how many years you trained and how fast you got, you always felt like you could get better, you know, like, oh man, I know nothing. Okay, you've raced at 8 World Cups, you know something, you know, like let's keep this in perspective, you know. But no matter how experienced we get, we have those moments of like questioning ourselves, you know, and that's just the nature of it. I mean, Kevin, I know that you have many, many Olympic stories too. I mean, in your experience.
Yeah. I tried for 3 different Olympic teams myself as a rower, and made, you know, some not great decisions about where I placed myself. You know, I had an opportunity in '76. I was at the Olympic camp, selection camp in January for 2 weeks in Florida. I had 1 semester of school to go. I made the choice at the end of that camp to take off and go back to school, thinking that I could get in a boat that would win at the trials rather than staying with the 8 camp. And it worked out that a few people either got injured or left the camp that I would have been in the Olympic 8 if I just would have stayed with the system. There were about 12 of us in running. I was probably number 11 or 12. So I thought like, I'm not going to make the 8. Is going to be, those guys are pretty set. So I'll go back to school. And then it ended up being not the case. I would have been in the Olympic 8 in '76. You know, it was like, what kind of decision was that? You know, in '80, we boycotted, you know, and I was in the position where I was doing pretty well, but I didn't want to sacrifice my family for going to a tour of a boycotted Olympics, you know. There's just a lot of things like that. '84, I had a great situation for the trials, and then things didn't work out with my pair partner, and there wasn't another option. It kind of went down south, you know, so we didn't win the trials and just things like that. And so that was my last hurrah. But I actually had the opportunity to coach in the Olympics in Rio in 2016 with a former UVA athlete, Megan O'Leary, that ended up at the Olympics. And she finally started rowing after she didn't row when she was in college, you know. So, but, you know, I said, you could be an Olympian in rowing. But she said, no, I want to keep playing softball. And then she ended up being an Olympian in rowing, and I had the opportunity to coach her. So I did get to go to the Olympics as a coach. But there's just so many things I say all the time. We talked about this before, is that for every person that is an Olympic gold medalist, there's probably 10 that had the opportunity or the chance and things didn't work out. Now, the persistence and the perseverance and the story of Lindsay's story, that's a big part of her being 1 out of the 10 to succeed. There is that, all right? But there are plenty of other stories about being an Olympic gold medalist or an Olympian that have not worked out for various reasons. So So the stick-to-itiveness of someone like her that just keep plugging and keep at it and do what she had to do to get there is impressive. And as all people that have done this story are impressive, but hers in particular, from where she came from, truly impressive.
You know, it's funny. I was recently asked all these years, and no one ever said to me, like, do you wish, you know, what if you had gone back and were able to start rowing when you were a freshman? How do you think that would have turned out? You know, and I'm like, well, it answers the question right there. And she was like, I think I know the answer, because the timing wouldn't have necessarily been there. I wasn't the same mature person. As you're saying, timing really is a huge piece of it, but not just that. You have to be able to notice the opportunity when it's there. And a lot of times, you know, to quote Thomas Edison here, opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work, you know, and right, it's that is. And so you have to be, you know, that willingness to take on that amount of work. And over the years as a coach, I've started to go, well, what was it? And this was a huge thing that I really wanted to pattern into the book, was that meaningfulness of it. The more challenging something is, you have to really, really, really want to do that thing for more than just the end result of the medal, for instance. And I know, and I started telling people and really thinking about this, that the medal itself was a byproduct of behavior of me and of my teammates. And, you know, we could have done all the same things and someone still could have been faster than us on that particular day. But the way that we behaved every single day with this desire to become better and this desire to be like, how great can I be at this thing? It's allowing me as a person to be better. And because for me, it was a turning point in my life, this life-changing thing where it put the element of control in my hands. That's what really kept me in it, where it was, I can actively become better at me through this sport. And so those really tough days, that's what helped me get through those tough days, was like, this is helping me be better, you know. And so the willing, you know, if it weren't tied to who I was as a person and that element of how is it benefiting me as a human being from a mood standpoint, from a personality standpoint, all the things that it was doing in my life, I probably would have walked away. You know, if I hadn't had this notion of, I want to be really great at this, I would have walked away. You know, and another question that I have been asked several times over the years is, are there any regrets? Because people will often say, well, you sacrifice a lot of things. Sacrifice is a word that comes up a lot when it comes to the games. And we used to always joke about it. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, when you get in the real world? And I was like, well, I pay taxes. Like, I pay for my health. I have health insurance. I have a house and I'm healthy. Like, what else? What is the real world exactly? You know, and I'm like, this is the life that I choose to live. And I never thought that I was giving anything up. You know, I was just doing something different, you know, with my life than my other friends at the time. And sometimes we joke about how you take your actual age is your chronological age minus years of training. And that's actually, you know, where you are age-wise, because you step into a vacuum to a certain extent where you prioritize. And, you know, when you have something that you want to do to this high level, you really have to pare down the number of things that you're doing at once. And so you set aside all these other things because that's what's most important to you, you know. And I'm thankful every day for the fact that rowing was a team sport. You know, I go back to it, it has these individual elements of the erg and the single, and we spent all this time rowing our own individual boats. But ultimately, that was to help us work better together as a group. You know, and that cohesion and getting to work with one another towards something, I know kept me in it. That's the type of person that I am. You know, I love being connected to people and being able to go back again and write this book and really look at all those connections. I think one of the hardest things, Kevin, about writing the book was not writing one giant thank you letter, you know, like feeling like I forgot to, you know, and something that actually really helped to bring this up a little bit was my editor said, that's what the acknowledgements are for. Like if there's a story that doesn't fit into this book, otherwise it'd be this, you know, this Encyclopedia Britannica versions, you know, volume A through Z. You know, write the story that fits. And then if there's anyone that doesn't, then that's when you really, you know, and for me, this book, it's many things, you know, and but it is a huge tribute to what I mentioned in the beginning about the small moments and these small connections that we make. And it's a massive tribute to the Virginia rowing program and Kevin, and people ask me when I first started writing the book, and this is one of the things that they tell you when you go to write a book, is what will make it successful to you, and you can't necessarily, like, if you're like, okay, I'm going to sell 1 million copies. Okay, well, about 200 out of 500,000 sell 1 million copies. Okay. So when I think about it, and I'm like, well, the fact that I finished it was a success. But the fact, so one of the first things I said was that when a stranger reads it and that it positively impacts them, and that's happened many times over already. But the fact that I've been able to write this book and share it with Kevin is like, period. Like that the book is a success, for me, because again, that's just this huge, I trace it all the way back to that moment when I woke up in the middle of the night and wished I weren't a lazy bum, and then lo and behold, bumping into Kevin. And it's just such proof that we can impact our own lives and impact the lives of one another, and that's why I say I have this sense of positivity and possibility and hope in my heart, because I know what has happened in my own life. And that is literally how and why I conduct myself the way that I do today. I went down a rabbit hole.
So I can tell you that, I can tell you that, so I'm not a stranger reading this book, obviously. I can tell you how impactful her words were to me, though. Because a lot of the things she talked about, I had either forgotten or didn't know about, even though I was pretty close to all this. There were obviously when she was at UVA, but then after we stayed in touch, but I didn't know all the intimate details of everything that went on, we'd check in every once in a while, that kind of stuff. But reading this book, I think I cried like 4 or 5 times, literally cried. And I'm a fairly emotional person, which people that know me know that, but I'll cry at a movie, and stuff like that. But my point is, this was real. This isn't a movie. This is real. And the impact that this book had on me personally, and the stories that she told, and the things that she said in the book, and not just about me, but about other people, just the impact that, she talks about Tom and Laurel a lot, and what they were doing. That actually was very impactful for me as too. There's a lot of things like that. And some of her teammates like Molly and like Dirks and, people like that. And then the people that she helped because she was helped along the way. And then when she was a little more of a vet, a new kid like Sam or Elle or somebody like that she helped, that became world champions and Olympic champions because of the fact that she helped them as she had been helped. Those are really, really cool stories and very, very important in life, because it's like, this whole pay it forward, it's like you get helped, help someone else. And there's things about, like, the old Coke commercial where somebody helps this lady across the street and somebody else sees that person help the lady across the street, and then they have an opportunity to help someone, and they do, and it's just geometric explosion. Those are really important things in life. And Lindsay did an incredible job of capturing that in her book. Incredible job. And so it was very impactful for me reading it. And I think others, if you haven't, you should, because it's, even if you don't know rowing at all, or you're non-athletic, it doesn't matter. What matters is the stories about, like she said, the positivity and the impacts you can make, just like a smile.
Yeah.
If one person smiles at you, that affects you, right? And then you smile and affect people around you, but it also, the smile that you make, like if I'm smiling right now, it affects me too, so those kind of impacts are huge. And we can never forget that. And she really, really does a good job in the book. She's a great storyteller, a great writer. I was actually a little bit surprised how well she wrote. I really was. She writes really, really well. And I told her that, and I said, wow, I'm no slam, just like a little surprised, a little bit, how well you wrote. And so it's an impactful book. It really is.
I appreciate that, Kevin. No slam at all. I don't take it as a personal affront. I take it as a huge compliment.
Well, perfect. Thank you both. I think we're going to move into a little bit of a Q&A now.
Sure.
We have a couple of pre-submitted questions I want to get to. We have a couple in the box as well. So one question is, rowing is a grueling sport. How did you maintain a love for the sport despite hundreds of hours of energy? It's because I have a high school daughter that seems to be losing motivation because there are no races due to the pandemic.
Yeah, actually, I wrote. All of a sudden, I came to this point where I was like, I have to write this book right now. And then the pandemic happened, so I spent a good portion of the pandemic editing the book. And I very intentionally speak and write about when you start training with the national team, you don't know if you're ever going to make the team, no matter how much you train. And so you never know if you're going to ever get to race again. That is a piece of it, And so I wrote that very directly to all the young people that might be going through that right now. Of like, we're doing all this training. When's there? I don't know. You just don't know. That's a piece of it. And that's why there's literally a line in there that says, when having a genuine desire to be your best, right? Like being connected to the sport beyond just the sport itself is that motivation. And I talk to all the athletes that I've gotten to work with over the years about that, is we always start with, what exactly do you want out of this? Why are you on this team? Why do you want to be a part of this? And it's normal to feel demotivated sometimes, particularly when things aren't going well, And so with coaches in particular that I've spoken to recently, find ways to make it fun, change things up. If you don't know there's a race coming, then do something different. Kevin used to have us, we'd play soccer with physio balls, If you read the German Democratic Republic, right, like way back, there's an old text called Rudern. It's literally just rowing. In that book, they specifically say, was it written in the 80s or the 70s?
70s, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it might have gone out of print in the 80s, but even in that book, they say with young people, play games like as part of the training. And you risk reward, cost benefit analysis, of course, but there are ways to mix it up and make it fun. So there's a twofold thing, because some people, there was a line I read recently in a great coaching book that said, why do people play sports? Friends, fun, and I can't remember what the other one was, maybe fitness, right? You to make friends, to have fun with it, and I think maybe fitness was the other one. But it's true. Even at the Olympic level, like you can break down my whole career to like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? And so for me, something that I do write about a lot in the book is enjoying what I did. So tying it to who you are and how it's helping you become better. Health lessons, life lessons, what can you learn through it? Friends, fun, fitness.
Yeah.
Long version of
that. Thanks, Lindsay, for mentioning that soccer game with physio balls. That my present athletes haven't done that yet, so now they're going to be asking me for that. Thanks a lot. That's good. That's good.
I only have one tiny scar.
You know what? There's a question here, or a statement by Beth Raisin. It says, my very wise father told me it is not a sacrifice if you are doing what you want to and pursuing your goals. Knowing what you know now, is there anything you would have done differently as a younger person? Lindsay.
And that's that goes back to that question of it. If anything were different, everything would be different, and I wouldn't have learned all the things, along the way. So I can't, because it's that butterfly effect. Had I not been in such a state of like, oh, woe is me, I wouldn't have been so open to like, oh my gosh, here's a chance to do something that is totally uncertain, very scary. I can, without a doubt, Kevin didn't walk up and go, oh, this girl is going to go to the Olympic Games. No, that girl's tall. Let's bring her on the team, So, we can never necessarily know what's good. And that's the fearful part. That's the thing, right? It's uncertain. The uncertainty is the scary thing. And yet we go after it anyway, and sometimes I have been asked like, well, what if you didn't win? I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe I wouldn't feel as strongly as I do, but holy cow, I'm in a way better place, medal or not, than I was, the day that Kevin and I bumped into each other. Yeah. I wouldn't, because I wouldn't be who I am today. I mean, I was not strong. I couldn't lift a 45-pound bar. I remember being like, what's this thing? The first day in the weight room with you, Kevin. And you're like, really?
Oh, man.
Push as hard as you can. 153 is all I got.
No, I keep
Yeah,
thinking
but those
about-
are,
I'm sorry.
go ahead,
I
Kevin.
keep thinking about that great movie that almost everybody watches around holiday times. It's a Wonderful Life. And he's taken out of his life, and what would have the town been without him? It would have been Potterville or whatever it was, that guy, the banker, but he showed what was possible for this, what actually happened because he was there, and I think we all, have impacts in life like that. Nobody, how small it could be, but like what would have happened if we wouldn't have run into each other? We don't know. What if it would have happened if I wouldn't have come to Virginia? What would have happened if Lindsay wouldn't have had that nightmare that he couldn't go to sleep that night before? What would have happened? Everybody can go through like what woulda, shoulda, coulda, what would have happened? So I always encourage everybody, like, if you have an opportunity, seize it. Because you don't know what'll happen. Like, seize it. And then if you could do something, it's like, yeah, that wasn't that cool. Okay, you don't do it again. Right. But if you have something you can like go get, then go get it. Because then it may turn out really cool. And say, oh, that was really cool. I want to do that again, and Lindsay just kept doing it again and again and again and again. And now she's got that gold medal that she keeps in her sock drawer or wherever she keeps it. So it's pretty cool what can happen.
Yeah, another question from the audience is from Bill. At the Olympic level, there is such a small margin between winners and the rest of the field. In retrospect, would love to hear what you think. What were the keys that got you across the line first?
Yeah. One of the biggest things is that we trained toward things that no one had ever done before. So at that level, you're literally like, the second year that I was on the team, we broke the world record, and we had gone from losing in kind of a demoralizing way to going faster than anyone had ever gone before within a year's time frame. And so we had gotten up to here, and then what took us that milliseconds of speed per day faster was that all of a sudden, the beginning of that year, nothing was all of a sudden. It was probably very calculated on Tom's part. He had a plan, like, get these kids involved in the program, and then we'll see how far along we can nudge them. And all of a sudden we went to training on speeds in every boat that we rode in. So we knew whether it was the single, pair, double, four, quad, 8, whatever the boat you're rowing, you knew how fast you were supposed to be going, conditions notwithstanding, at a specific rate. And that became part of just your training vernacular. You knew what your heart rates were supposed to be. And so when you trained during an easier day, a technical day, and you could go a certain speed and figure things out from a technical nuance standpoint, and it was pretty easy to go that speed, it boded well for higher levels of speed, and so that built your confidence toward that. And that allowed you to go, okay, we are getting better. This is working. And when you develop those little bits of confidence that this is working, and this is the hard thing with coaching, is that builds buy-in. So when your coach says, let's do this now, you're like, okay, I'm all in. Let's do that because this worked. And that's really the hardest hurdle, one of the hardest hurdles from a coaching standpoint to get over is that buy-in. And we were seeing that the program was working. And so we bought in. So when we were training, we were all in and focused on it. On the other hand, when we weren't training, we had so much fun and decompressed in so many ways. And I talk about this a lot in the book, very specifically because this element gets lost a lot of the time, in that we were enjoying that whole process. We were enjoying each other. We were enjoying being silly and ourselves. When I first started training, there were only 7 of us. 2 of us came out of Virginia. And so starting small like that allowed us to bring our own personality traits to the training center, which allowed us to be ourselves, which took off that pressure so that when we trained, we had more energy and more ability to train even better. Kevin, this goes down a whole extra rabbit hole. That's where I would say, we losing the novice program, the novice racing, kind of, you lose that. It's like, I'm new, where do I fit? And that is a huge piece that I think was incredibly unique to my time on the national team was we had this is not I show up and this is how it is. It's we show up and we were who we were. And so we got to build that identity from day one. To further answer, not only was it training toward a standard that wasn't based on what other people were doing, it was based on this other thing, which allowed us to focus on becoming the best we could be, that dragged us up. You pare down and prioritize everything. So I went to practice, I went to work, and everything else in my life I did was to allow me to be better. I was poor, so I slept a lot. I ate whatever was on sale, but I did very simple things. I didn't take supplements. I didn't drink coffee. There wasn't a special diet. It was eat as basically as I can, sleep a lot, and do every practice to the best of my ability. Once I did that one, then it was okay. Take a break, eat something, and go back to another practice and do it to the best of my ability.
Great. And then we'll end with this last question. It's from Jeff. Could you offer any advice to those writing or thinking to write their own book? Perhaps anything high level that you discovered? Thanks in advance.
Yeah. Hopefully Jeff's still out here. I linked up with a company. First of all, I'll put this here because you can investigate them. I linked up with a company that basically taught me how to write, and they're called Scribe is the name of this company. You can go there. They have a bunch of free resources, is why I say that. That'll give you a lot of really awesome tips. One of which was, why, what is your aim? Like, why do you want to write this book? And how will, what is the purpose behind it? What's it going to do? And so that was a big piece of it. I actually have it still hanging on my wall as a reminder, and that's where the subtitle of the book comes from, is like believing it's possible. It doesn't have to be certain. You just have to go, you know what? Maybe that can happen. Let's do it, and that's a huge piece of it. Writing a book, you could tell the same story of many different ways. And so knowing who your audience is, and if you want to tell a story, you picture yourself telling that story to someone, and for me, the person that I chose was a mixture of my younger me and two athletes that I coached at one of the college programs that I've coached at. And I mixed them together, and at the top of in my documents, I wrote their names in the header so that it always reminded me of, like, I'm sitting down and having coffee with these three of us sitting right there having a conversation. I'm just telling them what's happening. And from there, you build a table of contents. So what is my story thread? What are my themes? And then you just build it out from there like a work of art. Then you just drop in little stories. What stories help me tell this? And then you go from there. And then it just builds out over time. Getting that outline in place really makes a huge difference, because then you're not like, where did I put all of that? Well, chapter 1, you open up a document, you blah, 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 blah. You put everything down and don't look back. You just do it. You don't think, you don't edit, you just that. You can be totally misspelled. You can have the same line written 8 times. It does not matter. You just vomit it. They can call it a vomit draft. Get it all out based on what's going on right there. And then close that document and move on to chapter 2, right? So then the whole thing is down, and then you go back and start reading what you wrote. And some of it's good and some of it's terrible. For everyone, if you're still listening, I wrote 40,223 words in 3 weeks. And I didn't know what word count actually was, but 40,000 words in 3 weeks is kind of a lot. The book, over the next 6 months after that of editing for like 6 hours a day during a pandemic, turned into 112,000 words that I was worried was too long. I've had people tell me they read it in a single day, couldn't put it down. And I'm like, okay, apparently it's readable. I had a woman leave a review on Amazon, which was pretty amazing to open it up and read it. And it said she read it in 24 hours, couldn't put it down, and that it got her out of her funk, and that she felt like she was ready for anything that 2021 had in store. And that was pretty special. And that was when I brought up about a stranger reading it, Kevin, that was the first one that I was like, oh, somebody read this and it mattered, you know.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you both. Kevin asked about my virtual background earlier, and I told him, I said, well, both of you all are excellent and exude excellence. So I figured having these championship trophies behind me was a good way to set the stage. So thank you both so much for offering an hour of your time to share that book. But Lindsay has one more thing to say.
Well, because there's one more question in the Q&A about a piece of advice. Do you mind if I answer that question real quick?
Absolutely.
I don't know. As you take the next step, right? So taking the step, so been rowing for a long time, wants to go from high school to college, enjoy it, right? Like make it a part of your life. You know, I think one of the biggest questions that I got asked when I was coaching in college was people thought that it would take up a lot of time. And I can say without a doubt, rowing gave me more time, right? It helped me be more organized. We know that physical activity and social engagement, right? If you're going to go to a big school, being on a team gives you a little niche pocket, which is really, really great. You know, there are a lot of pieces of advice, but enjoy it and know that it can help your entire college experience be more organized, more effective, more productive, and better.
Well, anything to add, Coach?
No, yep, absolutely. I see it all the time where people are saying, oh, I can't keep rowing because it's taking too much time. And then they quit and then they get worse grades than they did when they were rowing because they're not as organized. And then they come back and go, you're right, Kevin, I want to come back on the team. You know, that kind of stuff. It's pretty amazing what it does. We get a higher GPA in the spring than we get in the fall because in the spring, things are a little more tight, traveling and that kind of stuff. But the GPAs are higher in the spring than the fall. Those GPAs are still good, but they're higher in the spring because it's like, you know, so it's so true. So true. Been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you both. And we hope that everyone out there enjoyed. Please be sure to hit the Amazon link and get yourself a copy of Better Great Than Never. And Lindsay and Kevin, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
everyone else, have a great rest of your day.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye.
Thanks, Kevin.